Luke Morgan was not a diplomat, not a warrior, and definitely not someone who wanted to be in the middle of alien royalty business. He was just a human engineer assigned to the royal flagship of the Ilari Empire after a strange chain of events. 2 weeks ago, during a routine inspection, a plasma core in the ship's heart almost went critical. Luke had been in the right place at the right time, using nothing more than a few cables, a heat shield, and a stubborn streak to stabilize. The Ilari didn't take such acts lightly. For them, saving a royal ship, especially with the princess aboard, was an act of honor. The captain insisted he stay on board until they returned to the capital. Luke didn't argue much. It was better than returning to Earth with nothing to do. That's how he found himself in the Royal Engineering Chamber, working on a broken crystal conduit. The conduit was tall, glowing faintly with soft blue light and humming with energy. It was delicate technology, something the Ilari treated almost like a living thing. Luke crouched beside it, muttering to himself as he tightened a connector. Just needs to be tied together forever. And it won't come apart again. He said it without thinking. Princess Talira, who had been watching quietly from the other side of the chamber, raised an eyebrow. Her silver hair shimmered under the conduit's light, and her green-gold eyes fixed on him in a way that made him pause. She tilted her head, her lips curling into a curious smile. "Wait, was that a proposal?" she asked, her voice warm but teasing. "Are you proposing marriage?" Luke froze. "What? No, But Talira stepped closer, still smiling. "In Ilari tradition, those words, tied together forever, they are not used lightly. They are said during bonding vows." He blinked at her, completely lost. "I meant the wires, the wires." Her smile didn't fade. "Perhaps, but you spoke them in my presence, and others heard." She glanced toward the doorway. Only then did Luke notice 2 guards standing there, watching silently. One of them looked amused, the other almost respectful. Luke's stomach dropped. No, this is a misunderstanding," he said quickly, raising his hands. "On Earth, we just say things like that when we fix stuff. It doesn't mean anything." Talira didn't seem offended. If anything, she seemed amused. "So you claim it was only about wires?" she asked, stepping even closer until she was just a few feet away. "Interesting. In our culture, such a statement, spoken before witnesses, binds 2 souls." Luke swallowed. "Look, Princess, I promise you I wasn't—" Before he could finish, a sharp beep came from his wristcom. The engineering chief's voice crackled through. "Morgan, we need you in Sector 9. A coolant line's ruptured near the reactor stabilizers." Grateful for the distraction, Luke nodded and began packing up his tools. "Sorry, duty calls. We'll talk later." Talira only gave him a small, knowing smile. "Indeed, we will." As Luke hurried out, he heard the guards murmuring in their own language. He didn't understand all of it, but he caught one word: bonded. Sector 9 was a mess when he arrived. Steam hissed from fractured pipes, and the air was heavy with the metallic scent of coolant. Luke worked quickly, sealing the leaks and rerouting pressure to prevent further damage. His hands moved automatically, his mind still caught on what had just happened with the princess. By the time he finished and returned to his quarters, the corridor felt different. People looked at him differently. Some nodded respectfully, others whispered when he passed. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was his imagination. The next morning, that theory was shattered when the princess herself walked into the repair bay. She wasn't wearing the formal royal attire this time, just a simple but elegant tunic, though still adorned with the silver crest of her house. She carried a tray of food, which she set down beside him without asking. "You skipped breakfast," she said matter-of-factly. "That is not healthy." Luke blinked. Thanks?" She sat down on a crate across from him, watching as he tinkered with a plasma coupling. "I have been thinking about your words yesterday," she said, her tone casual, though her eyes never left his. "In Ilari tradition, a proposal is sacred, public, and binding. Witnesses make it official." Luke sighed. "Princess, I really think you misunderstood. On Earth, that phrase isn't a proposal, it's just a saying." She tilted her head again. "Yet the witnesses believe otherwise. The rumor has spread." She leaned forward slightly, a small smirk forming. "Several nobles have already congratulated me on my bold choice." Luke groaned. "Great. Now they all think—" "That? You are a man of courage," Talira interrupted. "It is rare for someone to make such a declaration so suddenly. It is charming." He rubbed his face. "Look, I don't want to insult your culture, but I can't marry someone I just met." Talira didn't seem offended. If anything, she seemed entertained. "Then perhaps you should attend the moonlight ceremony in 2 nights. It is when couples swear loyalty. You might learn more about us." Luke hesitated. "You want me to watch?" Her smile widened. "Yes, watch. And perhaps consider." Before he could reply, she stood gracefully and left, leaving the tray of food behind. Luke stared at it for a moment, then shook his head. This was getting out of control. By midday, the situation was even worse. 3 alien engineers approached him, each offering a small gift, a gesture of respect for someone joining the royal line. Luke tried to refuse, but they insisted, telling him it would be an insult not to accept. When he passed through the main corridor, an alien diplomat he had never met clasped his shoulder and said in accented English, "Human, you will bring great honor to the Empire." He was too stunned to respond. Back in his quarters, Luke flopped onto his bunk and stared at the ceiling. "This is insane," he muttered. "I fix one conduit, say a few words, and now I'm halfway to a royal wedding?" Still, a small part of him replayed the image of Talira's smile, the way her eyes had caught the light. Maybe it wasn't the worst misunderstanding in the galaxy, but he had no idea just how far it was about to go. By the next morning, Luke had already decided to avoid the princess for a few days until the proposal confusion died down. Unfortunately, the galaxy seemed determined to do the opposite. He woke to a chime at his door. When it slid open, 2 palace attendants stood there holding a large polished case made of some kind of dark crystal. "From Her Highness, Princess Talira," one of them said, bowing slightly. Luke hesitated before taking it. Thanks." When they left, he placed it on the table and slowly opened it. Inside was a beautifully crafted tool set, not human-made, but Ilari engineering equipment. Each piece gleamed under the cabin lights, shaped with strange curves and patterns. A small note lay on top. It was written in the flowing Ilari script, but someone had translated it underneath. "For the man whose hand saved my ship. May they never be without the tools they deserve." Luke closed the case and ran a hand through his hair. "She's making this harder to explain," he muttered. Later that morning, he headed to the repair bay. On the way, he overheard a group of Ilari crew members talking in their own language. He couldn't understand much, but he recognized Talira's name and the word bonding. When they noticed him, they smiled politely and gave a small nod, the kind you give to someone of high status. In the repair bay, his friend Captain Elena Vasquez, one of the few other humans on board, was leaning against a console. She raised an eyebrow as soon as she saw him. "So," she said, "I hear you're marrying the princess." Luke groaned. "Oh, not you too. Elena, it was a misunderstanding." "Sure it was," she said with a smirk. "Look, Luke, you've been around long enough to know the Ilari take words seriously. If you said something that sounds like a bonding vow in their language and the princess didn't deny it, you might as well start picking out royal uniforms." "I didn't say it in their language." Luke protested. "I said it in English. Doesn't matter. The meaning was close enough, and you said it in front of witnesses." Elena crossed her arms. "If you try to back out in public, they'll see it as an insult to her and the Empire. That could cause a diplomatic mess." Luke leaned against the workbench. "So what? I'm supposed to just go along with it?" "Not necessarily," Elena said. "You could talk to her privately, explain clearly. But I've met her, Luke. Talira's not the type to let go once she's decided something." He didn't like the sound of that. Around midday, Talira appeared in the repair bay again. Luke had been trying to avoid her, but she moved with such quiet grace that she was suddenly beside him before he noticed. "Your quarters," she said. "Did you like the gift?" Luke nodded awkwardly. "Yeah. It's incredible, thank you. But, Princess, about this whole—" "The ceremony," she interrupted, "is tomorrow night. You should attend." He set down his tool. "Princess Talira, I don't think you understand—" She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Luke, I understand far more than you think. But tell me, if our positions were reversed and I saved your ship, would you not honor me?" He hesitated. "I would, of course I would. But that's not—" "Then come," she said simply, turning to leave. "You will see. And perhaps you will feel differently." Before he could reply, she was gone, her long silver hair catching the light as the doors closed behind her. By the end of the day, the rumors had grown. An alien diplomat in the corridor stopped him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You honor us, human," the diplomat said. "The joining of our peoples will be remembered for centuries." Luke forced a polite smile before hurrying away. In the mess hall, an Ilari officer offered him a seat at the captain's table, something that normally required years of service to earn. Luke declined, preferring to eat quietly in the corner. Still, he could feel eyes on him the entire time. That evening, Luke found himself pacing his quarters. The whole thing was spiraling out of control. If this ceremony went ahead and he was seen beside Talira, it could seal the misunderstanding as truth. He decided to speak with her before then, to make his position clear. The next morning, Luke requested a private meeting with Talira. She agreed, inviting him to one of the ship's observation lounges. The room was quiet, with floor-to-ceiling windows showing a vast field of stars. Talira stood there, hands clasped behind her back, watching the glow of a nearby nebula. "You wished to speak to me," she said without turning. Luke took a breath. "Princess, I respect you, and I'm honored to have helped your ship. But what happened in the engineering chamber? It was a misunderstanding. I didn't mean it as a proposal." She turned then, her eyes calm but sharp. "I believe you, Luke. But understand this. The people do not care about intention. They care about what they saw, what they heard. And now, they expect something." "So what am I supposed to do?" he asked. "Come to the ceremony," she said. "Stand beside me. Let them see unity. It does not have to mean marriage. Not yet. But it will calm the whispers." Luke studied her for a long moment. "And if I don't?" Her expression softened, but her voice stayed steady. "Then you will shame me before my court, and they will not forgive it." There it was, the trap Elena had warned him about. By the time he returned to his quarters, Luke's mind was racing. Part of him wanted to refuse outright, but another part knew that would cause trouble for everyone. Maybe even for Earth's relations with the Ilari. And deep down, he couldn't ignore something else. The way Talira had looked at him not just as a royal protecting her image, but as someone curious, interested. He lay back on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. "Fine," he muttered to himself. "I'll go to the ceremony, but I'm not agreeing to anything. Yet a small, unwelcome voice in the back of his mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, part of him wanted to. The day of the moonlight ceremony arrived faster than Luke wanted. The whole ship buzzed with excitement. The corridors were decorated with glowing silk banners that shimmered as if alive. Crystal lanterns floated along the ceilings, casting soft light that gave everything a dreamlike glow. Luke adjusted the formal jacket the palace attendants had given him, deep blue, with silver patterns running down the sleeves. It was beautiful, but he felt awkward wearing it. He wasn't a diplomat or a prince. He was an engineer who had gotten stuck in the middle of something much bigger than him. As he made his way toward the ceremony hall, Elena intercepted him. She took one look at his expression and smirked. "You look like a man walking into a trap." "Because I am," Luke muttered. "This whole thing is just to calm the whispers, remember? I'm standing there smiling and then I'm out." "If you believe that," Elena said, "you've never met a determined princess." Luke groaned. The moonlight ceremony was held in the ship's grand observatory, a massive dome of crystal-clear glass. Through it, the twin moons of the Alari homeworld shone brightly, one pale blue, the other silver-white. Hundreds of guests stood in a circle, their clothing shimmering under the moon's glow. When Luke entered, every head turned. Whispers moved through the crowd like a wave. He could feel the weight of their stares, curious, approving, even a little suspicious. Talira stood at the center, dressed in flowing silver robes that caught the moonlight like water. She smiled when she saw him, and for a moment, Luke forgot to breathe. She held out her hand. "You came," she said softly. "You asked," he replied, taking her hand. They walked together to the center of the circle. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. The ceremony began with music, soft, slow notes from strange stringed instruments that shimmered in the air. The high priest of the Alari stepped forward, speaking words Luke didn't understand. Talira leaned in and whispered, "He is welcoming the moonlight, asking it to bless those who stand here." Luke nodded, trying to look respectful. But then, the mood shifted. A tall, broad-shouldered Alari male stepped out from the crowd. His clothing was dark red and his eyes burned with challenge. "I protest," the man said loudly, his voice carrying through the hall. "This human has no right to stand beside the princess. He has not proven himself worthy." The guests began, murmuring. Talira's smile faded slightly and she straightened. "Lord Varric," she said, her voice calm but sharp, "you forget your place." Varric bowed slightly, but his tone was mocking. "I only wish to protect our traditions. If he wishes to stand here, let him prove himself in the trial of skill." Luke glanced at Talira. "Trial of skill?" he whispered. "A challenge," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Combat, endurance, problem-solving. It is a test to prove honor and ability, usually only for warriors or suitors." Luke's stomach sank. "Yeah, no, I'm not." But Varric's gaze was locked on him, and the crowd's attention had already shifted. The high priest looked between them. "Princess, the challenge has been spoken. Will you refuse it?" Talira hesitated. Refusing would mean rejecting tradition in front of her people, something that could weaken her position. She looked at Luke, her expression unreadable. "I accept," Luke heard himself say before he could stop. The room gasped. Talira's eyes widened slightly, then softened with something like pride. The trial was held in the arena deck, a huge, open space that could shift its layout for different events. In minutes, the floor rearranged into a strange obstacle course, twisting walkways, moving platforms, and hovering drones armed with stun beams. Varric stood on one side, holding a sleek dueling spear. Luke was given a simple toolkit and told the rules. Reach the far end, disable the defense grid, and return without being defeated. Talira watched from the viewing platform, her hands clasped. Elena stood beside her, murmuring something. Luke couldn't hear. The trial began. Varric moved quickly, leaping across platforms with practiced grace. Luke, meanwhile, avoided direct confrontation, using his toolkit to disable drones from a distance. One drone swooped down, firing a stun beam, but he ducked behind a barrier and pulled out a small emitter from his kit. A few quick adjustments, and the emitter overloaded the drone's sensors, sending it spinning out of control. The crowd murmured approvingly. Varric reached a control panel first, slashing through its defenses with his spear. Luke, instead of rushing, found a maintenance hatch and crawled through, bypassing 2 sections entirely. When he emerged, he was already close to the central defense node. Varric saw him and charged, the spear's tip glowing. Luke sidestepped, at the last second, using a small magnetic clamp to attach the spear to the metal floor. Varric yanked, but it stayed stuck for precious seconds, enough for Luke to get to the panel. With quick hands, Luke rerouted the power flow, shutting down the defense grid. Lights across the arena flickered and died. The High Priest's voice rang out, "The trial is complete!" Varric freed his weapon and glared at Luke, but the crowd was already cheering. Talira descended from the platform, walking straight to him. She took a silver pendant from around her neck and placed it over his head. "This," she said softly, "is given only to those who have earned the respect of my people." Luke, still catching his breath, stared at her. "You realize this is just making the rumors worse, right?" She smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But now they will not question you again." As the crowd's cheers echoed around them, Luke realized something unsettling. Part of him didn't mind standing beside her anymore. The cheers from the arena still echoed in Luke's mind long after the trial of skill ended. He had not expected to win. Certainly not against someone like Varric. But now, the Alari seemed to look at him differently. There was no more suspicion in their eyes, only respect. And in some, a kind of knowing approval. After the trial, Talira insisted he walk with her through the royal gardens on the observation deck. The gardens were unlike anything Luke had seen before. Not rows of flowers, but floating platforms, covered in silver-leafed vines, crystal pools that reflected the stars above, and strange glowing petals drifting on the air as if in slow motion. "These gardens," Talira said as they walked, "are kept only for the royal family. Very few outsiders have stepped here." Luke glanced around. "I'm guessing I'm one of the very few." "You are the only human," she corrected with a faint smile. They stopped beside a low pool, its surface rippling gently. Talira knelt and touched the water, sending circles of light across it. "You fought well today, not with strength, but with cleverness. That is rare." Luke shrugged. "I'm an engineer. I solve problems. Doesn't matter if it's a broken engine or a hostile drone." She looked at him for a moment, her eyes softer than usual. "Do you know why I allowed the challenge?" "Because it's tradition," he guessed. "Partly," she admitted, "but also, I wanted to see how you would face it. Not for me, but for yourself. The man who stands beside me cannot be one who only survives by luck." Luke smirked a little. "So, was that a test for a husband, or for a friend?" Her smile widened slightly. "Perhaps both." As they walked further, Talira began telling him about her childhood on the Alari homeworld, the endless ceremonies, the weight of always being watched, and the pressure to be perfect. "When I was young," she said, "I thought being princess meant freedom. I soon learned it meant the opposite." "So you never get time to yourself?" Luke asked. "Rarely. And when I do, it is often in places like this. The gardens, the observatory, or the ship's hidden decks." She glanced at him. "Perhaps one day I will show you my favorite place." "You mean I haven't seen it yet?" "No," she said simply. "It is not something I share with most." There was something in her voice that made Luke curious, but he didn't push. Instead, he asked, Does it bother you? Everyone assuming you and I, that we are bound, she finished for him. It does not bother me. What matters is how we handle it. To them, it is a story of two worlds joining. That is powerful. Luke frowned. And to you? She met his eyes. To me, it is not unpleasant. Over the next 2 days, Talira began appearing more often in the engineering bays, sometimes under the excuse of checking progress, but more often just to talk. She asked questions about Earth, the oceans, the mountains, the way humans celebrated small victories. In return, she shared more about Alari traditions, their art, and the stories passed down through her family. Luke found himself enjoying her company more than he expected. She had a sharp mind and a dry sense of humor that slipped through when she was relaxed. Once, while he was repairing a navigation panel, she leaned over and asked, "On Earth, is it common to charm a princess by ignoring her for the sake of wires?" "Depends on the princess," Luke replied without looking up, and she laughed, a sound he was beginning to like hearing. On the evening before the ship's arrival at the Alari capital, Talira sent a message asking him to meet her after the day's duties. She led him to a section of the ship he hadn't been to before, a narrow corridor ending in a small door. When it slid open, he stepped inside and stopped. It was a hidden observatory, much smaller than the Grand Dome, but with a perfect view of the stars. In the center floated a single crystal sphere, slowly rotating. Inside it, light shifted and swirled like captured nebulae. "This," Talira said softly, "is my favorite place. The sphere is called the Heart of Voyages. It holds the light from every star I have traveled to. I come here when I need to remember who I am, beyond the crown." Luke stepped closer, watching the colors shift. "It's beautiful." "It is," she agreed. Then, quieter, "And now you are part of its memory." He looked at her, unsure what to say. The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. For a moment, neither spoke, and the silence felt comfortable. They stayed there for nearly an hour, talking about everything and nothing. When it was time to leave, Talira paused at the door. "Tomorrow, we arrive at the capital. The court will expect us to stand together. Are you ready for that?" Luke hesitated. "I'm not sure, but I'll try." She smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't the smile of a princess addressing a subject. It was simply Talira smiling at Luke. That night, lying in his quarters, Luke realized something had shifted. When he first came aboard, she had been just a royal figure in an alien culture he didn't understand. Now, she was a person, one with burdens, with humor, and with a quiet strength that drew him in. The problem was, he wasn't sure if this was still just a misunderstanding anymore. The royal flagship descended toward the Alari capital, a vast city of silver towers rising from the surface of a green-blue world. Sunlight reflected off the buildings like polished metal, and enormous sky bridges connected the towers high above. The ground. Luke stood by one of the viewing windows, trying not to look nervous. He had spent the night thinking about Talira's words, about standing with her before the court. He told himself it was just to protect her honor and avoid political trouble, but deep down, he knew there was more to it now. When the ship landed, a formal procession awaited. The air outside shimmered with floating banners, and crowds filled the plaza, cheering as Talira stepped forward. She was in full ceremonial attire, silver and white robes, a crown of thin crystal arcs above her head. She glanced at Luke before they exited the ship. "Walk beside me," she said quietly. "No matter what happens, do not step away." He nodded, feeling the weight of her request. The palace was even more overwhelming than the city. Massive halls lined with glowing murals stretched for hundreds of meters, each one telling the history of the Alari people. Servants and officials bowed as they passed, but Luke could feel the stares, some curious, others openly disapproving. The grand court was already assembled when they entered the throne chamber. Nobles in elaborate clothing filled the rows, their eyes sharp and watchful. The emperor, Talira's father, sat on a raised dais at the far end, his robes heavy with gold trim, his face unreadable. "My daughter," he said, his voice deep and steady, "you have returned safely, and you bring a guest of unusual honor." Luke bowed awkwardly. "Your Majesty," the emperor's gaze swept over him, "you stand here because you saved my child's life. For that, we owe you thanks. But there are those who question your place beside her." A murmur moved through the court. Talira stepped forward. "Father, he has already proven himself before our people." "The trial of skill was not enough for some," the emperor interrupted. "Lord Varric has renewed his challenge, not of your safety, but of your choice." Luke felt the eyes of the court turn to him. Varric, standing near the front, smirked. "If the human wishes to remain by the princess, let him swear before us all that he will guard her, even at the cost of his own life." The demand hit Luke like a punch. He looked at Talira. Her face was calm, but her hands were clasped tightly. In front of her, he could walk away now, end the misunderstanding, and return to Earth. Or he could stay, knowing it would only bind him deeper into her world. The silence stretched until Luke heard his own voice. "I will." Varric's smirk faded slightly, but he stepped aside. The emperor leaned forward. "Then speak the vow." Luke took a breath. "I swear that if danger comes, I will stand between it and the princess. I will protect her not because I am bound by your law, but because I choose to." There was a stir in the court. His words had not followed the exact tradition, but the meaning was clear. The emperor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "So be it. The court will remember this." After the session, Talira walked with him through one of the quieter palace corridors. "You didn't have to say yes," she said. "Yeah, I did," Luke replied. "If I'd stayed quiet, they'd have used it against you. Besides, it's not like I don't mean it." Her steps slowed. "You mean it?" He glanced at her. "Yeah, I might not understand all your traditions, but I understand loyalty." There was a long pause. "Thank you, Luke," she said finally, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. That night, a celebration was held in the great hall. Music filled the air, and the court mingled under the glow of hanging crystal orbs. Luke stayed near the edges at first, sipping a drink that tasted faintly like citrus and mint. But Talira sought him out, drawing him into conversations with ministers, scholars, and even military commanders. To his surprise, most treated him with a new level of respect. Still, he could feel Varric's glare from across the room. The man did not approach, but Luke knew this wasn't over. Later, Talira led him out to one of the palace balconies. The city stretched below them, lights twinkling like stars on the ground. "You handled the court well today," she said. "Many in that room wanted to see you fail." "Yeah, I could tell," Luke said dryly. She smiled faintly. "Yet you did not. And now, they will think twice before challenging you again." He looked out at the city, the alien skyline glowing in the night. "I still don't know how I ended up here. 2 weeks ago, I was just fixing a power relay. Now," he glanced at her, "now I'm standing on a balcony with a princess who might actually think I proposed to her." Her smile deepened. "Might?" she teased. He shook his head, but there was no real protest in his voice. "You're impossible." "And you," she said, "are not as reluctant as you pretend." They stood in silence for a while, the night breeze cool against their faces. For the first time, Luke felt like he wasn't just surviving in her world, he was starting to belong to it. The following day began quietly. Luke woke early, walking through the palace's long glass corridors while the sun rose over the Alari capital. The light bathed the city in gold and blue, and for the first time since all this started, he felt a strange calm. But calm never lasted long here. Just after midday, the alarm sounded, a deep, echoing tone that shook the walls. Palace guards rushed through the halls, their boots hitting the polished floors in unison. Luke caught one of them. "What's happening?" "Security breach," the guard said quickly. "Possible attack on the royal family." Luke didn't waste time. He ran toward the central audience chamber, the last place he'd seen Talira. The scene inside froze him for half a second. The high, arched chamber was filled with smoke from a small explosion near the main door. Guards fought with masked intruders wearing black armor, their weapons firing bursts of electric light. And at the far end, Talira stood near the dais, two guards protecting her as more intruders pushed forward. Luke didn't think. He moved. Grabbing a fallen guard's shock staff, he ran straight into the fight. He wasn't trained for palace combat, but he knew how to use leverage, speed, and his environment. A masked attacker swung a blade toward him. Luke sidestepped, hooked the staff around the man's leg, and yanked hard, sending him crashing to the floor. He grabbed the attacker's stun grenade from his belt and threw it toward the cluster of intruders closest to Talira. The blast knocked them back, buying the guards a few seconds. "Luke!" Talira's voice cut through the chaos. She had moved down the steps, but another intruder was closing in on her from the side. Without thinking, Luke charged forward. The attacker saw him coming and swung, but Luke ducked low and drove his shoulder into the man's chest, slamming him into the wall. The shock staff discharged with a bright flash, and the attacker collapsed. Two more rushed toward Talira. Luke grabbed a decorative metal pole from the wall, part of a ceremonial banner, and used it like a long lever, sweeping their legs out from under them. He was breathing hard now, but adrenaline kept him moving. Reinforcements finally arrived. Palace guards in heavier armor, and the remaining intruders were forced back. Within minutes, the fighting ended, the smoke beginning to clear. Talira was unhurt, though her robes were torn at one sleeve. She walked toward him, her expression a mix of relief and something deeper. "You kept your vow?" she said softly. Luke, still catching his breath, managed a small smile. "Told you I meant it." The Emperor entered soon after, flanked by guards. His eyes swept the room, taking in the defeated intruders and then settling on Luke. "My daughter lives," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "And it seems we have you to thank again, human." Luke shifted uncomfortably under the attention. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," the Emperor said. "Many would have fled. You stood." The court members who had gathered were already murmuring, and Luke realized they weren't looking at him with suspicion anymore, only respect. That evening, a smaller, more private gathering was held in the gardens. Talira found him standing near one of the crystal pools, the reflection of the moons glowing on the water. "You didn't have to throw yourself into the fight like that," she said, her tone quieter than usual. "Yes, I did," Luke replied. "I made a promise in front of your people. If I'd failed, it wouldn't just hurt you. It would have proved Varric right." She studied him for a long moment. "And if there had been no court, no vow, would you still have done it?" Luke met her eyes. "Yeah, I would have." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night air carried the soft sound of water and distant music from the palace. Finally, Talira stepped closer. "Luke, you've changed something here. In me, in the court, in how my people see your kind. But there's one question left unanswered." He raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Her lips curved into a familiar, teasing smile. "Wait, was that a proposal?" she asked, echoing her first words to him. "Are you proposing marriage?" Luke chuckled, shaking his head. "You know, The first time you asked that, it was a complete misunderstanding. And now? She pressed. Gently. He took a step closer, the reflection of the moons catching in her eyes. Now, it's not a misunderstanding. Her smile softened. Is that a yes? It's a yes, he said simply. The next day, the court was told of their decision. There were no whispers of doubt this time, only cheers and the ringing of ceremonial chimes. The story spread quickly through the capital. The human who had once stumbled into a proposal had, in the end, made it real. And as they stood together on the palace balcony, looking out over the shining city, Luke realized something he hadn't before. He wasn't just in her world anymore. He belonged to it and to her.